Charles Walker was a man who had it all. At the age of 42, he owned a vast empire of businesses, luxury cars, a grand mansion perched high on a hill overlooking the sprawling city below, and everything money could buy. To the world, he was the embodiment of success, admired and envied by many. But despite all the grandeur that surrounded him, something gnawed at his soul. Late at night, while standing in front of the grand windows of his mansion, Charles often found himself staring at the lights of the city below. He wondered, was all this worth it? Was he surrounded by genuine people, or were they only interested in his wealth? He'd built a life that seemed perfect from the outside, but was it truly fulfilling? The question haunted him. Were people kind to him because they genuinely cared, or were they simply drawn to his wealth and status? The more he thought about it, the more a deep curiosity grew within him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him was a vast illusion, where people wore masks of kindness, but only for their own gain. It was time to find out. Charles Walker decided to create a social experiment, one that would strip away the facades of society and reveal the truth about humanity's true nature. The following day, Charles made the decision to disappear from his life of luxury. He carefully planned his disguise, determined to look nothing like the man he once was. He donned tattered, worn clothes, smudged dirt across his face, and took on a limp as if his body bore the weight of years of suffering. The transformation was startling. He was no longer Charles Walker, the wealthy businessman. He was now a homeless man, invisible to the rest of the world, just another forgotten soul. With his disguise complete, Charles ventured into the city, feeling the weight of his decision settle in. He stood on a busy corner, his eyes scanning the crowds of people who passed by without a second glance. He felt a deep sense of anonymity, a far cry from the life he'd known. For the first time in years, he wasn't a man with power or money. He was just another person on the streets, ignored and forgotten. Charles positioned himself on the corner strategically, hoping that the busyness of the area would bring him into contact with people from all walks of life. But as he sat there, he couldn't help but notice the apathy in their eyes. People walked by, heads down, lost in their own worlds, never pausing to acknowledge the existence of the homeless, like shadows fading into the backdrop. It was then that Charles saw her. Amidst the crowds, she stood out, not because of any extravagant appearance, but because of the way she moved through the world. Her name was Grace. She was a young woman in her late 20s, with eyes that told a story of hardship, yet still held a spark of warmth and compassion. Charles watched as she approached an elderly man sitting on the sidewalk, offering him a piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Her kindness was genuine, her smile soft but determined. She didn't seem to care about the wealth or status of the people she helped. She just helped. Grace, though homeless herself, had become known in the city's homeless community for her selflessness. While many struggled to survive, Grace always found a way to share what little she had. Her actions stirred something inside Charles. For the first time since starting his experiment, he began to question his assumptions. Could kindness truly exist in a world like this? Charles couldn't stop thinking about Grace. He returned to the same corner day after day, watching her from his hidden position. Every time she approached someone in need, whether it was sharing her last bit of food or offering comfort to a fellow homeless person, Grace displayed a constant, unwavering kindness. She was truly a beacon of light in an otherwise dark world. On the fourth day, Charles decided to test her. He knew that if anyone could reveal the truth about human nature, it would be Grace. He hobbled towards her, pretending to clutch his side in pain. He took a slow, limping step toward her, his face contorted in hunger and exhaustion. "Excuse me," he mumbled, barely able to form the words. "I haven't eaten in days. Could you spare anything?" Grace didn't hesitate for a second. She looked at him with tired yet kind eyes, and without a second thought reached into her bag. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's all I have left for today." She handed him a small sandwich. Charles's heart skipped a beat as he accepted the offering. It wasn't just the food that moved him. It was her heart, her willingness to give even when she had so little herself. For the next few days, Charles continued to return to the street corner, each time in his tattered disguise. Every time Grace showed him kindness. Every time she offered him something, be it food, water, or even a kind word. The more he watched, the more he realized that Grace wasn't giving because she had an abundance. She was giving because it was who she was. Her kindness was pure, untainted by the need for anything in return. Charles felt a growing sense of respect for her, but there was still one final test he needed to perform. He had to know if she would still see him, still offer her compassion, once she knew who he really was. On the fourth day of their interactions, Charles finally decided to reveal his true identity. He stood up, brushing off the dirt from his face, and reached for the fake beard that had concealed his features. With a deep breath, he tore it off, pulling back his tattered clothes to reveal the well-tailored suit beneath. Grace took a step back in shock, her eyes wide as she tried to comprehend what was happening. "Grace," Charles said, his voice steady but emotional, "I want to tell you something." Her brow furrowed, confusion flashing in her eyes. Before she could say anything, Charles spoke again, this time revealing his true identity. "I'm not homeless," he confessed. "My name is Charles Walker. I'm a businessman. I've been watching you for days and I've seen your kindness. You've shown me what true compassion looks like and I want to help you." Grace stood there, frozen, unable to process the words. Her mind raced, but the overwhelming emotions were too much to bear. Tears welled up in her eyes. Charles smiled gently as he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is for you," he said softly. "Inside is a check. A significant sum of money. Enough to get you back on your feet." Grace's hands shook as she took the envelope. The weight of what was happening was almost too much for her to grasp. But that wasn't all. Inside the envelope, along with the check, was a letter offering Grace a job at one of Charles's companies. "I believe someone as compassionate as you would be an asset to my team," he said. "You deserve more than this life." Grace, still stunned, could barely speak. The life she had known, living on the streets, struggling to survive, seemed like a distant memory in that moment. She looked up at Charles, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Why would you do this for me? Why would someone like you help someone like me?" Charles's smile deepened and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you showed me something important. Kindness isn't about money or status. It's about what's in your heart. You gave everything you had and you never expected anything in return. That's something that's rare in this world and I want to help you succeed." Grace's life changed in an instant. She accepted the job offer and began working at Charles's company, using the opportunity not just to rebuild her own life, but to help others who were struggling, just as she once had. The small apartment Charles helped her secure was a stark contrast to the cold streets she'd once roamed. But through it all, Grace never forgot her roots. She remained humble and kind, always finding ways to give back to the community. She volunteered, advocated for the homeless, and used her position to make a real difference in the lives of others. Word of Grace's story spread quickly throughout the city. People saw in her not just a survivor, but a beacon of hope. Her kindness inspired others to act with generosity and compassion. And soon, the ripple effect of her actions reached far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Charles too was changed. Inspired by Grace, he increased his philanthropic efforts, helping those in need and using his wealth and influence for good. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured by the size of his mansion or his bank account, but by the difference he could make in the lives of others.